Good morning. You're listening to Central Wisconsin's 24-hour information station, AM 1320 WFHR. It's time now for the Morning Magazine, brought to you by Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing. Now, with the Morning Magazine, here's Carl Hilke.
Thank you, Jerry, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's show on AM 1320 and also on the web at WFHR.com. And we also welcome our friends from RCCA Media, who are here digitally recording in high definition our discussion today, because Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink is here for the entire program, and we invite your participation. And area code 715-424-2600 or pound 1320 on a U.S. cellular phone. With that, we welcome the Mayor of Wisconsin Rapids, Zach Vruwink. Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning, Carl. Thanks for having me again.
Okay, well, a little touch of fall for a couple of days before we go back to summer weather.
What a swing from the weekend, wasn't it?
Yes. But I'm sure as we get ready for fall, the city starts making its preparations for the turn of the seasons. And one thing that always is in the back of my mind from my coverage of City Hall over the years is I know things like snow removal budgets are in the minds, and we're talking about an El Nino winter, and they're saying one thing, we're going to have above normal temperatures, but they're not sure if we're going to have above normal snowfall or lesser snowfall.
Sure. Yeah,
so
warmer doesn't mean hot. It means warmer. Probably.
That could mean stormier. How are we, as we get planning for the fall-winter season, how are we budget-wise in the city?
Well, we don't want to talk winter yet because we still have Public Works construction projects to finish.
I know, but I want to get to that.
So don't jinx it for us, Carl. We have streets to get finished here. Otherwise, they're not going to get open before winter. But hopefully, we will finish our construction on Chestnut Street. Apple Street is just finished, and some of the other streets are on par to be completed on time. So that's a good thing. We've got some other projects as well that the crews will be taking after they finish street construction. But in terms of preparation for fall and winter, obviously, budgets for snow removal are on a, as they have been in the past. Our budget kind of cuts the winter in half because we're on a calendar year budget. So we budget on a calendar basis, and so obviously that depends on what's going to happen between now and December 31st.
Well, you mentioned those projects. Are any surprises?
Well, like anything else, you don't know what you don't know under the surface till you open it up. We've got drawings of what was done in the as-built, A drawings of things, but nothing is ever perfect, and so some of those projects have had some surprises, but nothing out of the ordinary.
Okay.
In terms of Chestnut Street, our approach has been to take it kind of in block sections, so we're not closing the entirety of it. Particularly if we do run into some unknowns between now and completion, we don't want to leave the street open at all through the winter if it's not completed. How
long realistically do we have left of the construction season?
We'd have late September. We can pour concrete, as long as the weather's good, into early October, but that's pushing it. You've got to make sure.
That's why I asked that question.
Temperatures and moisture and all that, right?
Okay,
yeah.
So you're hoping for good weather so they can keep working.
We'll take the rain now, but it can get dry again for a while.
Yeah, dry for a while so that you can have crews out there doing their stuff and get things done.
We could use the rain though, as it's been dry.
And well, that's the other thing we did. We have been in a little bit of a drought situation, so we needed that rain. We got a good soaking rain out of. But last night was the Common Council meeting for the month, and highlights of last night's meeting.
A couple of items under our new business last night was related to the wastewater treatment facility. We haven't done a wastewater rate study for some time, and really in a comprehensive fashion that would look at all of the costs to treat waste. We've got like everyone knows, our residential household waste water that is discharged to the plant, which is just everyday sort of wastewater. But then you've got things like your commercial, which is kind of common and similar to that of residential. But then you have our industrial users. So anybody that's creating a product or a process that results in discharge of wastewater. So it could be the landfill, could be any of our cranberry processors, that discharge us some waste. So at this point, the wastewater commission and then the council affirmed last night the selection of a consultant to do that wastewater study. So essentially what that'll do is that'll look at all of the costs to treat certain wastes, and what the rate study is intended to do is rebalance the expense or the cost centers to treat waste. So logic would tell you that it takes more resources, whether it's energy or whether it's chemicals or time, which translates to money, to treat certain types of waste. And the easiest stuff is to treat the flow is the easiest flow to treat is household waste. So in effect, you'd like to think that should be the cheaper of the rate classification. So this process will give us a lot more information. The waste that our industrial users are sending us is high strength in many cases. It's heavily loaded with BOD and some of the other issues that need to be dealt with before or when it gets to the plant, and ultimately before it gets discharged back into the river system. So there's that piece that the council talked about last night. There's nothing going to be in there about projected rate increases or any of that. It's merely a study to understand what it costs to treat certain waste, so we can essentially then take it a step further, and that would be assessing rates to treat that waste of those classifications.
Okay, so if it costs more to treat your waste, you would pay more.
Ideally, yeah, right. It'd be a progressive system where, I as a household ratepayer on my sewer, in my sewer bill, shouldn't be subsidizing other rate classifications.
Okay.
That's kind of the system today, not in a large part, but it's safe to say that because we haven't done the study, we don't know. And so this will tell us if in fact, we've had rate increases in our sewer utility last number of years, and so this will help us make more educated decisions around our rate increases and classifications.
Have there been communities around here who've done this study, or other communities our size who have done this, and you can look at their experience?
Sure. Marshfield was one that actually just completed, I believe last year is when they completed their rate study. And again, they've got different industrial users. They don't have cranberry processors up there, but they have other users that discharge different types of waste, all of which cost certain sort of treatment processes or indicate certain treatment processes at the treatment plant. So this will, again, like Marshfield, be able to help us take a look at our entire customer structure and look at the rates in which we charge certain users.
How long will it take to complete the study?
I believe we're going to have that information early this fall. It's a fairly not easy, but a short time frame. It's a matter of the consultant going through and analyzing certain processes at the plant. There's all these, from dewatering to adding the chemicals and the different processes at the plant, that all obviously require some analysis, and that's what the consultant is going to do.
How could this affect business retention and attraction?
Well, having attractive rates or competitive rates is important. So just to have a rate, very kind of kind of specific way of assessing rates to certain types of waste users could be a deterrent. So if we have a wet user, as they're called, those users that use a lot of water or wastewater, have a lot of needs there, are called wet users. So if we have a wet user that comes to town and says, I'm going to be using this amount of water, consuming this amount of water for my process, and therefore I'm going to discharge this much water, but in that discharge will be a certain high strength of this sort of, maybe it's proteins, maybe it's BOD, maybe it's in the case of the cranberry processing, it's a lot of sugar. Those things, we can then say, well, here's the cost to treat that, but to incentivize you, because you're going to create this many jobs or you're going to invest this much in your plant, we can then have that conversation. Today, frankly, we don't know what it costs to treat certain types of waste. So this will help educate not only the treatment plant and those that are operating it and the superintendent, but also those of us that are in the kind of recruitment and retention side of the business.
Well, as a ratepayer, I'm glad. I don't want to be subsidizing someone else. If they're causing more expense, why should I be paying part of that?
That's correct. That's correct. So this will give us clarity and understanding exactly what are some of the root causes. Our treatment costs have gone up in the last number of years, but why?
That's going to be answering that question.
That's correct, exactly. As opposed to saying, okay, we've got a funding gap that we need to meet, so we're going to raise rates across the board 3% or some number to make up that gap.
And could it also point out areas where you can improve efficiency in the operation of the plant?
Definitely. A side, kind of a concurrent project to this project of the rate study has been an analysis where we've engaged all of our industrial users to sit at the table and to talk about what their discharging has caused some challenges in plant operation, which results in more cost because you have to add things like polymer, and polymer isn't cheap. So when you have to add more of those treatment, those processes to your treatment, it costs everyone money. And so as opposed to saying, okay, ratepayers, everyone, we need everyone to kick in a proportionate share, an equal share, this will be more equitable and I think more fair to those that are discharging waste to the treatment plant.
Will be interesting to see what.
There was a second item also on there related to wastewater under new business, and that was our West Side lift station. This is the lift station that's right near the zoo.
Okay.
Back there, where actually the original West Side treatment plant was way back when. But today it operates as a lift station. So what that does is that lift station feeds the force main, the under river crossing that sends the waste from the west side of the river to the east side treatment plant. And that facilities plan has not been developed. That we know that every piece of infrastructure, whether it's a street or a pipe or anything in between, has a life cycle, and so we have not put together that facilities plan of what any maintenance that's necessary beyond what we do on a regular basis. Are there other things that we need to assess for? Maybe deficiencies in that system, in the force main that goes under the river. Obviously, you're dealing with waterways, and the last thing we want to have is some unanticipated problem,
which could be very costly.
It could be a leak. It could be anything, and it would be incredibly costly and probably come with its own federal sort of challenges, because we're dealing with waterways. So the other piece that the council approved last night was a consultant to address the West Side lift station and put together a facilities plan for the council and ultimately the public to support any sort of replacement or any ongoing reconstruction of that would be on the horizon.
Well, it sounds like, based on in the previous discussions I've had with waterworks and lighting folks, is that there's going to be future work needed there, but this will give you an idea and a strategic plan of what needs to be done and when.
Yeah, and how much is it going to cost, right? How are we going to be able to adequately save over the years if we've got an annual savings plan to be able to afford these things when it's necessary, or is it something that, hey, you need to focus here now and maybe bond or issue some sort of bond for payment of those that investment. But at the end of the day, it's all infrastructure, and if it's not maintained, it becomes a liability. It's no longer an asset to the community, and that's the last thing we want to do, because the cost is compounded then, and it becomes more expensive.
Well, we've talked a lot about infrastructure and in our short, brief time, and that is a crucial issue right now, because cities are getting older. Yeah. They don't get younger.
Right.
And the infrastructure, there's a lot of older infrastructure, and there's a lot of older infrastructure in Wisconsin Rapids.
That's right.
Do we have an overall plan or overall look at our total infrastructure in this city?
Well, I hope at our September gathering here on your radio that we'll have our newly seated Public Works Director join me. He hasn't taken his appointment yet at the city. He won't start until the 14th of September. But Joe Terry, who was previously the village administrator and engineer at the Village of Port Edwards, has accepted the Public Works Director position with the city, and very excited about having him.
He's a good guy.
But his core charge is to develop that long-term capital improvements plan for the city. And we've had, in fact, he hasn't started, but he and I meet to discuss sort of what's that first 100 days going to look like when you do move to the city and in terms of his work. What's going to be his area of focus? What are going to be those areas of attention for the first 100 days and beyond? Because we know that we've got a very sort of helter-skelter capital improvements plan. We've got something that's going to drive our budgeting process, which, okay, what are the needs that need to be done next year or maybe the year after? But we don't have that 5-year or even 10-year or even beyond capital improvements plan for in large, from our buildings to our streets to our underground facilities. Our water and light utility keeps their capital improvement plan for the utility side of things, but on the capital side of our other infrastructure that we've talked about, we don't have a very long forward-looking plan, and that'll be primary charge of the Director of Public Works.
And we're challenged climate-wise in this area. As we learned, last year we had water main breaks. It seemed like crazy all over the city, and they were very visible.
That's right.
People, and that sometimes indicates older infrastructure underneath. They can't take the cold anymore. And so, and
there's a hidden cost. There's a hidden cost to all of that breakage. I mean, one strategy could be we will lower them as they break or deal with them as they come, but there's also that hidden cost of disruption. Nobody likes to be disrupted. No ratepayer, no user wants to have disruption. So that requires a plan, because a lot of those laterals, why they have to run water in the winter and have had for how long, and obviously there's a cost to running water because you got to treat it at the treatment plant. You might not need to treat it with a lot of chemicals, but hey, you got to run the pumps, you got to staff the utility. So we need to put together a plan that lowers those laterals. That a lot of those extensions are too shallow, and hence why they freeze sooner than others in other parts of the community. Plus, there's also the aging component, right? How old are these things? If they're to a point where they're stressed or they're deteriorated to a point where they're going to break easier, that's obviously another issue that needs to be looked at. So, part of the capital improvements planning, this will be a good conversation for our next show when Joe is seated, is to talk about it. What goes into developing the criteria for a capital improvements plan? What goes into the maintenance side of the equation, and what goes into the replacement side? Because it's both. It's not just replacing in a capital improvement. It's also what's the maintenance that's required to keep it through its useful life. The last thing you want to do is have to replace it before it needs to be replaced, or sooner than its useful life.
And we take our utilities for granted until they're not functioning.
That's right.
Whether it be electrical utility or water utility, when something goes haywire and all of a sudden I'm getting an advisory that I'm broadcasting, folks are going to have low water pressure because of a water main break.
Sure.
Don't flush, don't do it. All of a sudden, your whole life goes.
It's different, right? You take those things for granted. You're exactly right.
Okay. 424-2600, pound 1320 on a U.S. cellular phone is your chance to talk to Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink. And I'm going to bring up something that I was asked to bring up to you, Your Honor, and it's by some of our neighbors in this area. And it has to do with this potato processing thing. People are upset about the smell.
Oh, next door.
Yeah, next door. They're upset about the smell. They're upset. We got someone that parks in our parking lot because they say the stuff, they work there, but they say the flakes or stuff is falling on their car. Okay. And I'm sure you've heard from some other folks.
Right.
So what can you tell us?
So
what can be done? What about the good neighbor policy?
Well, they're great people, and they believe in this community. They're not from here, but they've invested here.
Sure.
So obviously we welcome.
We like that, and we welcome that investment.
We have to appreciate that and recognize that. But in terms of kind of the consequence of their process, right, and that's Wisconsin dehydration, and their process is to take potatoes and dehydrate them, essentially dry them, and they're used in pet food all across the East Coast. Anywhere, I guess, east of the Mississippi is easy to say, in Costco and Kirkland and some of the other brands, grocery store chains, in terms of their dog food. But they're also going to be bringing carrots. They're going to be adding lines with carrots and some other things. So, it smells like sweet potatoes sometimes, and so there's a smell, and maybe a burnt smell sometimes too. Prior to taking the job and the assignment here at City Hall, I smelled burnt coffee at the coffee shop for my business. So I know what smell, you got to deal with beyond sort of the smell of the paper company maybe at times. But as far as the discharge of the flakes, there was a process that the city required them to do, and I'm not sure if that's been completed, and that is to essentially scrub some of that air before it escapes. So the materials and the particles would be captured before it's discharged in the air, and that was a requirement as part of their facilities plan. But there's obviously a window that they have to complete that, and I'm not certain if that's been completed. So I can relay that and
I said I would ask about this. People, I say, well, it's an industrial process. I mean, as long as they're following the laws of the state of Wisconsin and everything else, I mean, we put up with a lot of stink in other parts.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, and you say compliance, and that's the tough part, is if everything is in compliance, but yet there's still some concern. I recognize that Jeremy and Ed and the other partners in the business would probably say, yeah, we'll work with you and address it, because they're just good people.
Okay. Well, just let them know there was some concern.
Sure.
And so I said, I've done my job. I fulfilled my promise.
I'll check with zoning on the issue.
Let's talk about waterfront development. And in your latest email newsletter, you talked about Senator Baldwin's Waterfront Community Revitalization and Resiliency Act. Mm-hmm. And we also have, the Superman Studio presenting the second phase Riverfront design concepts. Mm-hmm. Someone might say, what's the big deal about this? Mm-hmm. Why is this so important?
Mm-hmm. Or even a federal concern for that matter? Yeah. Well, Senator Baldwin's legislation that she introduced just maybe 2 weeks ago, I believe, was very much recognizing that Wisconsin and waterfronts across the country need to be resilient, but in many cases they need to be revitalized. In cases like, we still have industry that's functioning on our riverfront, but take Village of Port Edwards, for example, it's sitting with an idle site on its waterfront. The Waterfront Resiliency and Revitalization Act was intended to say that the federal government should make this a priority and care about waterfronts, whether it's rivers or lakefronts or ports, whatever indicate or whatever variety of waterfront it might be, that there is opportunity for the federal government to support revitalization of these waterfronts. So the first piece of that was establishing a federal grant program, which on the smallest scale would be $50,000 to $1 million to develop projects such as improving waterfront access, getting to the waterfront or getting to the water, acquiring easements for public amenities, something that we're fortunate to have a lot of easements that have provided for public space. Many communities don't have that. They're largely privatized. And then making any infrastructure upgrades. So it might be street improvements. In our case, the river wall, obviously takes a lot of flooding and has taken a lot of flooding over the years. So any sort of infrastructure like water or river wall improvement or any other infrastructure for that matter.
I was always wondering about that river wall because it does take a battering, especially in the spring. Okay, we got our first caller, Your Honor. Put on your headsets and we'll get to our caller. Please remember to turn down your radio when you do call in. Okay, you're on the air with Mayor Vruwink.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Vruwink.
Good morning.
My name is Al. I live in the town of Rome. Mm-hmm. First, let me say the city of Wisconsin Rapids is very lucky to get Joe Terry. He's an awesome man. You guys
We're excited.
You'll go really far with him.
Yes, thank you. It's a good opportunity for him to be more focused, too.
I'm sorry. My question is, we have a lot of growth going on in Rome, and it's come up about running water and sewer from Wisconsin Rapids. And I know when I was a town supervisor, it had come up, and it was going to be millions. Mm-hmm. I guess has the CDA or anything talked to Wisconsin Rapids, because we keep hearing figures anywhere from 10 million to 30 million. And I guess what caught my ear was when you said, it's infrastructure, but at some point the asset becomes a liability. So I was just wondering if anyone from the town is working with the city of Wisconsin Rapids to see what a true cost would be, because I know probably 6 years ago when we had talked about it, it was like there's no way the town could afford it. I was just wondering what your thoughts were and if anyone had contacted you. And I'll get off the phone because I'm actually driving to work. I work for the county, but I'd love to hear your response.
Sure.
Okay, thank you for the call.
Thanks for the call, Al, and raising the question. Just yesterday they had their business after hours, but it was city council, so I couldn't make it down
I was in town of Rome, and I got to see what I toured during the winter months, the Sands development, the trap shooting area, and deer queues.
Yeah.
So
it's a lot happening. So to the caller's question about potential extension of utilities, costs, there's obviously a lot of, it's a pretty complex sort of conversation, but in short, we have been having some loose conversations with members of their Community Development Authority, their CDA, to talk about if that request were to come forward, kind of in what fashion would we want to discuss it and how would we discuss it? Because today the city takes wastewater from the village of Rudolph as well as the village of Buren, but does not extend individually water or sewer to anybody that's not annexed to the city. So in terms of policy, that's kind of getting that piece out of the way. But as it relates to the cost to extend, there is a bit of a distance between the city and the town, and where they would, the ground that would have to be covered to extend the utilities.
And you got 2 counties.
Yeah, and there's separation of county. I would say that anything is possible, but of course it comes with a price. And I think the town's challenge previously was who's going to pay for it, right? The users of the town that were at present or still are there today didn't really have a need, but obviously any future development, should there be lodging or hotel accommodations at the site and anything else development that's around that, there would be a demand that the town probably couldn't meet today. So should that opportunity come forth, the city would react and respond and probably discuss it in a way that I would hope would consider the region's economic impact. The concern or the challenge for us is the fact that all of our users and ratepayers have invested in the system. So to come and join the party late, what does that cost? What does that look like? It's not just the extension and running the lines. It's, hey, we've maintained this infrastructure to date and intend to in the future.
And do we have the capacity to handle?
Well, a lot of it would be low loadings. It's not wet industrial users, so it's flow. And so when you're treating flow, it's just more gallons in terms of the plant. So it wouldn't be taxing us. But yes, there's limitations to the plant as well in the amount of flow that we can take. But as far as the town specific request, I know in their TIF plan, which was just at a hearing last week, they brought that up as a potential expenditure, or included that as an item that, hey, this will cost somebody, and if it's going to cost somebody, the developer, by way of what they'll pay in taxes, the new increment that's generated down there, could potentially be an expenditure could be to think about extending utilities. But there's a lot to discuss in that question, but really it's a good question, because as far as a good neighbor and supporting the region's economic growth, no question would we look at it and entertain it.
What's happening there is going to benefit this community.
Yeah.
I mean, people who go to play the golf courses of central Wisconsin, they're talking about the development of a central Wisconsin golf trail with the golf courses in Rome and Wisconsin Rapids and the like. Well, where are they going to stay?
That's right.
I mean, they might decide, hey, I want to stay at Hotel Mead, or I want to stay at Quality,
The amenities are in the city, right? Your shopping or any of your entertainment.
Or I want to go to see a Rafters game while I'm, So, I mean, there's benefit. And then that leads into the discussion we've had with Representative Krug. That highway, it's 2 lanes. In the future, could you see that being developed into a 4-lane highway?
Yeah, if the traffic count indicated that it was, you need to upgrade it. I think it's got a ways to go before it gets there. But yeah, if there's the traffic and the demand, or even, there's talk about what other sort of transportation options could exist, and shuttling and transportation, because we know, if a large share of the course's play is generated from jet traffic and airplane traffic, we're going to need to get those folks down to the airport. And what does that transportation system look like too?
Okay, yeah, and that leads into our airport and keeping it up to date. Okay, we got another call, Your Honor, so let's get right to them. Good morning, you're on the air with Mayor Vruwink.
Yeah, my concern is the riverbank. The clearing, there was a piece in the paper about, people wanted to see the river better. So, clearing it of brush and other organic materials, when you have, that's a concern for me, is for pollution, runoff. I think, you need to maintain a buffer along the river. So if you get heavy rainfalls or flooding or whatever the case may be, that it keeps the riverbank stable.
That's a great point. We just this last spring did some clearing at the request of a number of residents who live on or near the riverbank, to open up the views of the river. And but of course, like you say, it's more than just seeing the river. It's also, how do you protect the riverbank from falling into the river. You lose that riverbank, you've got a major problem on your hands. So depends on what section of the riverbank you're talking about. Some of it, as we talked downtown, has more of an urban section of the river wall that was put in, in the Army Corps days where they installed that actually. But then you move south a little bit, and there's a much smaller river wall, and so a lot of that river wall, some of it has failed, some of it's in really good shape, but there's kind of the spectrum. So how we address and prepare for even climate change and the amount of flooding that could occur, regular events. Thankfully we haven't had regular events like we had the two in recent years, because that would really challenge our riverbank and require us to plan and to make sure that we've stabilized that bank to the greatest extent possible.
Does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, I guess so. Why did you go ahead and clear, just because, a lot of times people don't understand the dynamics of, why it's important to have a vegetation buffer there for the river.
Right.
So if somebody comes along and says, well, I want to see the river better, but if it's detrimental to the river and more, polluting the river with runoff,
nothing was changed.
That's
That's a great point. Nothing was changed by way of stormwater in the way the runoff occurs today. In fact, most of those discharges they go through piping into the river directly. There isn't a curb system, a natural sort of rain garden sort of ecosystem or swaling that occurs. It's all curbed and it all runs directly into the river. But in terms of bank stabilization, we certainly need to make sure that we're not removing some of the vegetation that does stabilize the bank, and that was a concern when Public Works went ahead and did do some of the trimming that they had done this last spring. None of it was removed. It was more of we have an obligation to keep the riverbank maintained, and part of it is to make sure that the invasive species and other things are kept at bay. So the DNR actually has been approached to talk about how we put together a riverbank management plan about dealing with the invasive species that have unfortunately grown in our riverbank, and in some cases are obstructing the view. So it's a system that needs to be planned for and put together to make sure we're not using a shotgun approach and just appeasing a request to clear the bank so it can be seen.
Okay. Well, we have.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Invasive species is a very serious problem in this state, and that's something a lot of times people forget. Those pretty little plants that you'd like, they're not native. Yeah. Well, we got to take our first break, and I want to continue because I want to see how this fits into the second phase Riverfront design concepts that Supermass Studio presented recently. And the phone lines are open at 424-2600, pound 1320 on a U.S. cellular phone. Your chance to visit with Mayor Vruwink here on the Morning Magazine.
Good morning and welcome back to the Morning Magazine, presented by Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing. It's time for part 2. Once again, here's Carl Hilke.
Thank you, Jerry, and welcome back, everybody, to today's show on AM 1320 and WFHR.com. On this day where we get a taste of fall, a quick programming note coming up Friday in part 1 of the Morning Magazine. We will be visiting with Wisconsin Tourism Secretary Stephanie Klett, talking about the state's fall tourism campaign. Today we want you to talk with your mayor. Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink is here for the entire show, and we invite your participation at 715-424-2600 or pound 1320 on a U.S. cellular phone. We also welcome our friends from RCCA Media. Jesse's here making sure I look somewhat good in high definition. Like I said, I have a face for radio. But we're talking about the Riverfront going into break, and recently there was another meeting. Supermass Studio presented its second phase Riverfront design concepts, and this kind of goes into what we were talking about and addresses some of the concerns of the last caller. So why don't we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and it's kind of a tie-in too back to the conversation that we talked about in that Senator Baldwin's legislation, which seeks to promote greater sustainability and promote healthy ecosystems along the riverfronts and waterfronts. Because if you don't have, as the caller indicated, a good management plan, it's not healthy, and
right.
So you can really disrupt ecosystems and challenge those species that are enjoying their life along the riverfront. And so as it relates to us as people and humans, the Supermass Studio, as part of the riverfront design plan, was they included actually on the east bank of river some bioswales that will actually treat stormwater the way that isn't being done today in the city. So very much thinking ecology and sustainability in their efforts to design enhancements on the riverfront. So Supermass Studio was the consultant that the city had selected to refine its concepts for its open spaces plan, and the open spaces plan is essentially the waterfront that's public from Demetz Park across from Aspirus Riverview Hospital all the way up to the dam at SS Peter and Paul, across from SS Peter and Paul Church, and to talk about what improvements could be made along the waterfront. It's not meant to be a tomorrow plan, but it's
long range.
It's very much a long range plan. We've gotten we've done all the other planning for a lot of the spaces surrounding it, land use, all of that, but we haven't ever gotten to the point where we've designed the actual spaces, amenities in the spaces. So they'll be back in town. We did have a visit from them on August 5th, where members of the public were invited to join us in the evening to hear and to see the more refined plans. They will be back again in mid-September, around the time of the City Council meeting, so about a month from now, to present their plan to city leaders and the City Council. Following that, it's my intention to take that to the community and to get really broad-based community input and feedback on the refined concepts. It's interesting, there was actually just the other day I saw somebody had started what's called a Kickstarter page or a fund page to raise monies for the improvements. I mean, there is a general excitement, I would say across generations about this, recognizing that public spaces are indeed public and we should be using them for our benefit.
At the community picnic that you and I were at, I noticed the way the river, the potential uses for the river. And I think there were people there that have never really been down to the river.
Right.
And they saw, the
flatboard,
the flatboarding, and they saw that, and they're going, and that's a new business in
That's
town.
right.
I mean, so there's opportunities. There might be opportunities for somebody to start a little dinner cruise or something.
Yeah. I mean, there's a multitude of opportunities that can still respect the river, but still utilize it in a way that promotes healthy living. It promotes recreation, getting outside, getting active. And our hope through this process is to design concepts that will promote getting people to and on and into the river.
Okay. Well, and other communities have done that to great success.
That's right.
And in some ways, this kind of reminds me of what Stevens Point went through when they developed the Green Circle Trail. It was, hey, we got this area, we want to develop it, and it's become a major tourist attraction.
Yeah. Something very simple, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't require a ton of specialty planning and all of that. There's some technical aspects to all of this, but really it's about how do you create more attractive places for commerce, for residences, and also for recreation. And that's very much the vision of this plan and all of our activities in the waterfront district.
Yeah, I heard from a friend I hadn't heard from him, said, "Oh yeah, I'm coming up to central Wisconsin." "Oh really? Yeah, I'm going to bike the Green Circle Trail." I'm going, and it's serious, folks. I mean, this is happening. It can happen here, and that's the bottom line if we do it right.
Yep.
And
really asking ourselves, what is our green circle, or what is the attraction that brings people to certain areas? I've heard a lot from residents that have young children and families that have talked about going to Plainfield and using the splash pad there, and how it's such an attraction that people from our community are driving to Plainfield to spend a day or an afternoon with their kids in a splash pad, a public outdoor place where they can spend time and have fun with their kids. And same thing goes for our aquatics and any other recreational offering for that matter, that if we don't have these spaces, people will travel or leave, frankly, for seeking them.
And business recruiters or business siters who are looking for places to site a business look at these types of things because they're thinking about, okay, can this community recruit the workers that we will need to operate a facility?
That's right. Yeah.
And so quality of life becomes a big issue, which leads into, since I mentioned ciders, it's been a while now, a couple of years since we got that designation from WEDC, and WEDC's got its own slate of problems.
Right.
But what's the latest on what's happening in the East Commerce?
They continue to market it alongside all the other sites. So recognizing it's, we all watch the news and see what's happening, but we also see what announcements are happening, and there haven't been any major plant expansions or major investments with new sort of development on greenfield sites across the state. There's been pockets of them. Stevens Point's had some success with some of their local companies that have grown and have built new facilities and that sort of thing. But no, year to date, we have not had, that site has been very quiet. But we did include it in the Wisconsin Site Selection magazine, which went out to site selectors internationally. We did have took a 2-page spread out about the site and told the story of why that site should be considered and people's desire to select a site. In the same vein, sort of connected to that and on economic growth, is the Regional Economic Growth Initiative. Met with their board chair and the gentleman that's actually been brought on board to lead that effort, and I'm assuming that he'll be on a future program with you, talking about the vision and sort of the action now that position has been filled, really as a kind of a nice puzzle piece that's come into place, hopefully for what can come in terms of attraction or even growth of our local companies.
Yeah, we have this infrastructure in terms of communication. We have the internet and everything else. It's been told that you can run a call center or whatever from Wisconsin Rapids. Have you been getting any response from?
We don't have a lot of space available.
What about the downtown, the old consolidated?
Well, the River Block building is something that's been of very strong interest by myself, and that's the fact that it's the single largest unoccupied building in central Wisconsin. We don't have 75,000 square foot of office space in that configuration anywhere in the greater central Wisconsin area, so it's a prime opportunity. It's now been talked about, if there's other uses of the site. I think the owner is very interested in delivering a win for the community and helping to support that by way of occupying that space again. It is 100% vacant today. At one point it had 400 people working in it, right? And 400 paychecks every 2 weeks. And Jesse was probably one of those people that worked in the building. I know my mom, I remember walking in it all the time. But it is a priority of mine to get that building occupied. And if it's occupied again, it can be a quick way to kind of instill some life into the downtown economy, but even the region's economy. And that needs to be a core piece of our strategy. It's not so much, in as much as we'd like the greenfield sites here in your neighborhood here, over here, and others, but it's also taking a look at that infill opportunity. What sites do we have that are underutilized, that are vacant, blighted, or might require a unique strategy to get them occupied again? What's
the quality of that building? Since
it's in great shape. I mean, of course, like anything else, it needs upkeep and maintenance, and it's not brand new. It was built in the 80s, so it's got its own kind of life cycle challenges maybe. But from what I'm told, the building is in sound shape, and the HVAC system and a lot of the other electrical stuff, it of course is 80s technology, but there's ways to modernize it without having to break the bank or even tear it down.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit more about the downtown with you, but we've got to take one more break, and then we'll be back to wrap up our hour-long session with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink. But you still have the opportunity to talk to your mayor at 424-2600, pound 1320 on a U.S. cellular phone. Welcome back to the Morning Magazine. We've been visiting with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink for the entire hour. We will still take your phone calls if you have a call for the mayor at 424-2600, pound 1320 on a U.S. cellular phone. What used to be called the Labor Temple and was a sports bar, and there's some other thing. What's going to happen to that building? Everyone is wondering, and then the idea of developing condos or whatever. What's going on?
Yeah, what's the update? That's a good question. So we don't own any more than we owned the last time I was on the radio show.
Okay.
So as a refresher, we own what was formerly the Jim Spath building, which has that cranberry, maybe mural, as some people have called it. I'm not sure if I would agree, but it's got a mural on the side that faces the courthouse. Next to that is the USDA, which is actually going to be relocating in front of the mall at the strip mall out next to the Daily Tribune offices and the former Big Apple Bagel space. That'll be the USDA. And then as far as the Labor Temple and formerly Good Time Charlie's, which is closed, and Jamaican Kitchens, which is relocated and moved out. That building is entirely vacant now.
Where did Jamaican Kitchens?
Joy says she's going to take the fall and the winter off. They're doing a lot of catering events. They have
I know that.
She was telling me to go to Bayfield. They go everywhere.
They were at the community picnic.
But she said, we want to regroup and
Sure.
we're going to look at locations. So they haven't made any commitments anywhere. Okay. So they're going to kind of refocus and take a look at where they need to be. We do want to keep them in town, though. Obviously, they bring a good product, and I enjoy eating a lot of Jamaican that they prepare for
I love
events.
their jerk pork.
So the plan is to still negotiate with the remaining property owners about acquiring their sites and package that for redevelopment. The timeline, we're going to be, as soon as USDA moves out, which they've extended a couple of times, so it's taken them a little bit longer to find space and to move out. And that building will come down in probably around the time of our next radio show. I don't know. As soon as we're done with Chestnut, they're going to move downtown and start demolishing the buildings. So that'll happen in late September. Kind of paralleling this whole thing while we're still negotiating with the property owners, we very much desire to acquire everything. Part of that process, there might be some relocations. We've got a couple of other businesses that are still occupying space, like Four Stools and the law firm, and actually Room Pro Technologies is in the former utility building that's there. So working with those property owners, that we're not going to force anyone out before we need the property, and we're going to work with them in the process. But as far as kind of a parallel piece to all of this is the city's going to this fall issue an RFP for housing. We don't have
which is
requests for proposals. We don't have a good handle on what the gaps are for housing in the market. So without saying, hey, we want to put condos downtown or we want to put apartments, we don't know what the gaps in the market are. We have an idea of what the gaps are. We see a lot of senior housing getting requests for permitting and all of that. But what are the other gaps, and what's the extent is the needs or the market not met? And frankly, the last housing project that we just permitted, which was Swiderski's development across from Midstate, that's another 50-some units that'll be built in the community. And how far along are we in the demand? Are we meeting the demand? Are we exceeding demand? Or are we short? In meeting the demand. And so the housing study will be similar to what Stevens Point and Marshfield completed in the last number of years that told them, here are the gaps. You've got gaps in housing of this value. You've got gaps in this type of housing, if it's apartments or condos or a variety. It could be senior housing. It could be low-income housing. We don't know. We have ideas because those developers have showed up and said, we want to build this because we see an opportunity or a demand, but we haven't quantified it ourselves. So as part of that redevelopment across from the courthouse and the triangle block that you're referring to, is we want to get the housing piece done, and then hopefully get more progress on acquiring those properties, so that way through spring we can demo what we own, and if there's still tenants in the buildings, if in fact we've come to terms on it, continue to walk the process. Following the RFP for housing, it's our intention to issue a request for proposals for developers to formally quantify who are the developers in the market or outside of the market that have interest in investing here. And from that point, we will use that exercise to say, okay, the city's going to put up this as an incentive. We're going to maybe say, okay, you're going to spend $4 million to develop the property, and then you're going to create this many jobs. We're going to create this much office space. They're going to tell us what they can do with the site. And
do you see that as a combination residential business type of development area?
Very much mixed use. If folks have been to Hagemeister Park, which is a nice kind of brew pub, gastropub downtown in Green Bay's waterfront.
Okay.
It's a nice mixed use development there that has actually a children's museum. It has a number of retail and sort of service type businesses, but it's got offices on the another floor, and then it's got housing, and it's a mixture of market housing, but also some low income or mixed income housing. So we haven't gotten to the point of, to the details of the development, because one, we need to get site control.
Right.
Followed by site control, we've got to figure out what's the demand in our market, and then from there, what's the appetite? Who wants to invest here? What are they willing to spend? What are they willing to invest to get the project off the ground?
And then the cleanup. Aesthetically, it's an important part of the city. You want it to look good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No question.
Okay. Well, it sounds like a lot of work ahead.
It is. I'll tell you, a busy summer. It's been busiest.
Well, we look forward to our visit next month when we'll get to visit with Mr. Terry and talk about his long-range views for our infrastructure.
As a representative for the city.
Okay. Well, Your Honor, I appreciate the time this morning, and we'll talk again next month.
Carl, thanks for the time, and thanks to the listeners for joining us this morning.
And with that, we're going to wrap up today's edition of the Morning Magazine. The Morning Magazine, as always, has been brought to you on AM 1320 and WFHR.com by Comfort Air. And remember, you can catch a video replay on your local cable channel, RCCA Media cable channel, or just go to their website, rccamedia.org.
That's right.
And with that...